I was 19 when my father held out his hand and asked for my house key. There was no shouting anymore. The argument had burned itself out hours earlier, leaving behind something colder and more deliberate. "Give it to me," he said. My mother stood behind him, arms crossed tightly, her gaze fixed somewhere above my shoulder. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the problem. "I'm not ashamed," I told them, my voice trembling despite my effort to steady it. My hand rested instinctively against my stomach. "That's the problem," my father replied. The kitchen felt too bright. The clock above the stove ticked loudly, marking seconds that felt like decisions. "You're not staying here," my mother said flatly. "We won't have this under our roof. This. Not the baby. Not their daughter. This." I looked around the house I'd grown up in. The hallway where my school pictures hung. The dining table where we prayed before every meal. The front door I'd unlocked thousands of times without thinking. My father stepped closer. The key. I placed it in his palm. It felt heavier leaving my hand than it ever had resting there. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly, as if I were the one abandoning something sacred. I didn't argue. I picked up my backpack and walked out. What they didn't know was I would never need their house again. In our house, curtains were drawn just enough to suggest warmth but never enough to reveal mess. My mother ironed tablecloths before guests arrived, even if the guests were only church friends coming for coffee. My father trimmed the hedges every Saturday morning, not because they were overgrown but because he believed neatness signaled discipline. We were the kind of family that arrived early to service and stayed late to shake hands. "What will people think?" my mother would whisper whenever something disrupted the surface. The phrase followed everything. When my skirt was deemed too short. When my brother talked back. When my grade slipped from an A to a B. What will people think? It wasn't a question. It was policy. Reputation mattered more than comfort. Presentation mattered more than conversation. My father believed that image was protection. If you looked stable, people assumed you were. So when I told them I was pregnant, the first thing my mother asked wasn't whether I was scared. She asked who knew. My father paced the living room, muttering about the pastor, the neighbors, the family friends who had watched me grow up. "This will follow us," he said. "Follow us. Not you. Not me. Us." In their minds, my pregnancy wasn't a personal turning point. It was a public liability. "We raised you better than this," my mother said. Better meant quiet. Better meant compliant. Better meant invisible. When I refused to fix it, their fear hardened into something sharper. Not because they hated me. Because they believed I was jeopardizing everything they had spent years polishing. They didn't throw me out because they stopped loving me. They threw me out because they loved their image more. And in a house where reputation ruled, there was no room for imperfection. They didn't make the decision privately. They waited until dinner. My aunt was visiting and my brother was at the table, and the air carried that familiar tension that meant something had already been discussed without me. My father cleared his throat midway through the meal. "We need to resolve this," he said. Resolve? As if I were an equation. My mother set her fork down carefully. "You still have options," she said. "This doesn't have to define your future." Define? They never said the word abortion directly. They didn't need to. It hung between us like an unspoken requirement. "I'm keeping the baby," I replied. Silence fell so fast it felt rehearsed. My father's voice lowered. "You're not thinking long-term." "I am," I said quietly. "More than ever." "You're 19, he snapped. "You don't even have a plan." "I'll make one." My mother's composure cracked slightly. "Do you understand what this will do to us?" To us. It was always about us. "If you choose this," my father said slowly, "you're choosing it without our support." There it was. The ultimatum disguised as concern. I looked around the table, the framed family portraits on the wall, the place settings arranged with precision. I loved them, but I loved my child more. "I'm not giving her up," I said. Her. I had started thinking of the baby that way already. My father pushed back his chair. "Then you're not staying here." The decision wasn't shouted. It was finalized. At that moment I understood something painful and permanent. Love in our house had conditions, and I had just refused them. The door didn't slam. It closed quietly behind me. That was almost worse. I stood on the porch for a moment, staring at the driveway where my father's car sat perfectly aligned as always. No one followed me out. No one called my name. Lily answered on the first ring when I called her. "Come over," she said. No questions. No hesitation. Her apartment was a small cluttered lived-in. It didn't smell like polish or order. It smelled like coffee and laundry detergent. I set my backpack down in the corner of her spare room and sat on the edge of the bed, my hand resting over my stomach. My phone stayed silent. No texts asking if I got somewhere safe. No messages about doctor appointments. No, "we need to talk." The family group chat disappeared within days. I wasn't muted. I was removed. On social media, my mother posted scripture about forgiveness and difficult seasons. My father shared an article about strong parenting in modern times. Relatives commented with heart emojis and vague encouragement. No one mentioned me. There was no baby shower. No awkward reconciliation brunch. No grandmother knitting blankets in secret. I went to my first prenatal appointment alone. I filled out forms listing friend as my emergency contact. I learned how to calculate due dates without anyone else in the room. The silence wasn't loud. It was systematic. I wasn't arguing anymore. I was erased. At night, lying on Lily's mattress, I would press my hand to my stomach and whisper plans into the dark. I didn't know how I would afford childcare. I didn't know where I would live long term. But I knew one thing with certainty. If they wanted distance, I would build from it. And I would build without apology. The first year was survival. I worked mornings at a cafe and evenings stocking shelves at a pharmacy. In between, I attended community college classes carrying a notebook filled with schedules that looked impossible on paper. I learned to sleep in fragments. I learned to stretch groceries for days. When my daughter was born, I held her and understood something steady and immovable. I didn't need approval anymore. I needed income. Lily helped for the first few months, but I refused to let generosity become dependence. I applied for childcare assistance and waited in long lines, filled out forms that asked about a father's contribution. I left that section blank. My parents didn't call when she arrived. They didn't send flowers. A distant cousin mailed a card that simply read, "Stay strong." So I did. I studied after she fell asleep. I took certification courses that didn't require full-time tuition. I learned budgeting the way some people learn theology, precisely without room for interpretation. Progress wasn't dramatic. It was incremental. A better job. A small promotion. A savings account that grew slowly instead of disappearing overnight. A reliable babysitter who charged fairly. A used car that didn't stall at intersections. My daughter thrived. She laughed easily. She slept deeply. She didn't know she was missing grandparents at birthday parties. She only knew I showed up. Years passed quietly. I finished my degree. Transitioned into a steady office position. Took on additional training. Learned the difference between surviving and stabilizing. There were nights I felt exhausted beyond language. There were moments I wondered if they were right, if life would have been easier under their roof, under their conditions. But then I would watch my daughter read aloud at the kitchen table we eventually bought secondhand, and I would feel something else. Not regret. Strength. The life we built wasn't polished. It was earned. And earning something slowly changes the way you carry it. The first time I held the keys to my own house, I didn't cry. I stood in the doorway and exhaled. It wasn't a large home. The paint needed refreshing, the floors creaked in certain spots, and the backyard was modest at best. But it was mine. The mortgage approval letter carried only my name. The payments were structured around my salary. No one else's income, no one else's signature. My daughter ran from room to room, claiming corners with the excitement only children possess. "This is my room," she asked 3 times just to be sure. "Yes," I said. "All of it is ours." The word ours felt different now. Not inherited. Constructed. Around the same time, I heard through relatives that my parents had downsized to a smaller place near the church. They still hosted gatherings and still posted photos of holidays arranged carefully for public viewing. Their lives looked tidy from the outside. The image had survived. But something in their tone had shifted when my name surfaced in conversation. I wasn't described as lost anymore. I was described as doing all right. All right. It was progress. They never visited the house. Not in those early years. But they knew I owned it. They knew I had paid for it without assistance. Word travels quietly through families. The contrast wasn't loud. They had preserved their reputation. I had built resilience. They valued what people saw. I valued what my daughter felt when she walked into her own bedroom without fear of being asked to leave. The stability I learned doesn't arrive in celebration. It arrives in steady payments, consistent work, and quiet nights where no one is threatening your place at the table. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for permission to belong. I had already built it. It was late afternoon when the knock came. My daughter was at the kitchen table working through her math homework. The house is quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. I wasn't expecting anyone. The knock came again, firmer this time. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked toward the front door. Through the narrow window beside it, I saw two silhouettes standing close together on the porch. My parents. For a moment I didn't move. 10 years. 10 years of silence measured only by occasional updates passed through distant relatives. No birthday cards. No holiday visits. No spontaneous phone calls asking how we were. And now they were standing on the welcome mat I had bought on clearance the year I moved in. I opened the door slowly. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. My father's shoulders, once rigid with certainty, seemed slightly bent. Neither of them spoke right away. My daughter appeared behind me, curious. "Who is it?" she whispered. "Go finish your homework," I said gently, not taking my eyes off them. My father cleared his throat first. "Can we come in?" he asked. The irony settled quietly between us. The house they said I couldn't maintain. The life they said would collapse without them. Now they were asking to enter it. I stepped aside. Not because I forgot the night they took my key, but because I remembered it perfectly. They sat stiffly on my couch, hands folded in their laps like visitors rather than parents. I waited. My mother spoke first. "We wouldn't be here if it wasn't serious." Seriously. The word carried weight but not apology. My father removed a folder from under his arm and placed it on the coffee table. The edges were worn papers inside, unevenly stacked. "It's the house," he said. I didn't ask which house. There had only ever been one that mattered to them. "We're behind," he continued. "The bank sent a final notice." Final notice. My mother leaned forward slightly. "And your father's medical bills, they escalated. Insurance didn't cover everything." Medical bills. For years my father had dismissed health concerns as minor inconveniences. Strong men didn't complain. Now there were printed statements on my coffee table. Amounts circled in red. Deadlines underlined. "We thought we could manage it," my mother said softly. "But it's more than we expected." Expected. The same word they used when I told them I was pregnant. I flipped through the papers carefully. Foreclosure warning. Hospital invoices. Past due notices. They weren't here for reconciliation. They were here because stability had shifted. "And we didn't know who else to ask," my father said. The sentence landed with quiet clarity. 10 years ago they told me I was choosing life without them. Now they were choosing to step into the life I built. Because they needed something. And the daughter they once removed was the only one positioned to provide it. I closed the folder gently and placed it back on the table. "I'm sorry it's come to this," my mother said. Sorry. The word hovered between us uncertainly. "We never wanted things to turn out this way." My father added, his voice lower than I remembered. "Which part?" I asked calmly. "The foreclosure or me?" They exchanged a glance. My mother exhaled first. "We were protecting our family." "You were protecting your image," I replied. The room didn't explode. It tightened. My father leaned forward. "You don't understand what that time was like for us." "I understand exactly what it was like," I said. "I was there. 10 years ago I stood in their kitchen with a backpack and a baby on the way. 10 years ago they told me I could stay only if I fixed it." I looked at my father, now sitting in the house I paid for. "Do you remember the night you took my key?" I asked. Silence. My mother's eyes flickered downward. "We thought it would push you to reconsider," she whispered. "It pushed me out," I corrected. I reached into the small dish near the door and picked up the key to my house. The metal was warm from the afternoon light. I walked back to the table and placed it in front of them. "This is mine," I said. "No one can take it from me." The symbolism didn't need explanation. Years ago he held out his hand and demanded my key. Now they were sitting inside the home I built without theirs. "We need help," my father said quietly. "I know," I replied. My mother's voice softened. You've done well. We see that. Seeing it now didn't erase before. I'm willing to review the numbers, I said. But this won't be unconditional. My father straightened slightly. What does that mean? It means if I help it's structured. It's documented. And it doesn't erase the last decade. No yelling. No accusation. Just a boundary. They had come assuming parental authority still carried weight. Instead they found measured authority seated across from them. Power doesn't shout when it shifts. It simply settles. And that afternoon it settled clearly. No one reached for the folder again. My father's hands remained resting on his knees, fingers slightly curled, as if he were steadying himself against something invisible. My mother stared at the key on the table longer than she had looked at me all evening. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of my daughter's pencil scratching against paper in her room. Years ago they controlled the terms. Now they were waiting for mine. We didn't think. My father began, then stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They hadn't thought I would build something stable. They hadn't thought I would endure. They hadn't thought I would be the one holding leverage. And now they were sitting in the space I created, dependent on the daughter they once removed. The reversal wasn't loud. It didn't require humiliation. It was structural. My mother folded her hands tightly in her lap. We were afraid, she said quietly. Of what? I asked. Of what people would say. The same fear that drove them 10 years ago. But the difference was clear now. I had built something rooted in responsibility. They had built something rooted in reputation. Reputation fades. Structure holds. No one argued. No one raised their voice. The silence between us was not hostile. It was an acknowledgement. And in that silence the hierarchy shifted completely. Not because I demanded it. Because it was inevitable. I picked up the foreclosure notice again and slid it back into the folder. I'll help you negotiate with the bank, I said. And I'll review the medical bills. Relief flickered across my mother's face. But I continued, this isn't a blank check. My father nodded slowly as if he had expected that. If we move forward it's documented, I said. Clear repayment terms. Transparency about expenses. No emotional rewriting of what happened. My mother opened her mouth then closed it. We were wrong, she said quietly. It wasn't just wrong, I replied. It was decisive. 10 years had passed without birthdays, without visits, without acknowledgement of my daughter. Help didn't erase that. It only addressed the present. I'm willing to assist financially in structured ways, I said. But I'm not rebuilding the past for you. My father exhaled. We understand. And for the first time I believed he did. There was no dramatic reconciliation. No hugging in the living room. No sudden declarations of unconditional love. There was structure. There were terms. And there was clarity. I wasn't rescuing them. I was setting boundaries. And boundaries, when defined calmly, don't invite negotiation. They invite respect. After they left, I stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the quiet settle back into place. My daughter came out of her room and wrapped her arms around me. Are they coming back? She asked. Maybe, I said. But not the way they once did. For years they cared about what people thought. I cared about what my child needed. That difference shaped everything. They prioritized reputation over reality, image over vulnerability, the illusion of perfection over the responsibility of love. I chose stability, not because I was stronger, because I had to be. They once believed my pregnancy was a threat to their legacy. Now they understand that legacy isn't preserved through denial. It's preserved through consistency. Helping them didn't erase the night they took my key. It didn't rewrite the silence that followed. It simply proved that growth doesn't require resentment. It requires clarity. They cared about public opinion. I cared about survival. And survival, when done quietly and persistently, becomes strength. I don't need apologies to validate the life I built. I don't need them to understand every sacrifice. I needed to know I could stand without them. And I did. Because in the end what people think fades. What you build remains. And I built something they once said I couldn't. That is enough.